With all the excitement for a Nintendo Direct in the air, one aspect that I don't think has been given much consideration is who might actually headline a new General Direct presentation. Time was, Satoru Iwata often led Direct presentations in the short period of turmoil after his death, which coincided with a lull for the company anyway, with the 3DS in its midlife and the Wii U already on its last legs. Directs were hosted by a number of people, including, as had been the case previously, regional leaders such as Reggie Fils-Aimé and Satoru Shibata. But in April 2017, the company introduced a new format for the Directs, more streamlined, more stylized, more corporate, and with the same presenter across all regions. This was the man who had become the de facto head of Nintendo's development output, while Shigeru Miyamoto became a fellow of the company and focused on other matters such as, ultimately, the film and theme park development. Sometimes Takahashi would be joined by his number two, Yoshiaki Koizumi, mostly to showcase new hardware or to partner with him on the presentation of Switch Sports and other games. We even saw the odd cameo from Reggie Fils-Aimé and Doug Bowser, with the former notably having a big role in the E3 2017 presentation, which was very much a transitional one for the company. However, this decade, the direct format has been pretty consistent. Partner showcases and indie worlds have had just voiceovers. Game-specific directs may occasionally feature interviews with senior producers such as Sakamoto and notably Eiji Aonuma, and Shigeru Miyamoto continues to be the face of many major projects. Otherwise, though, it is Shinya Takahashi's show. Or it was. Because when he signed off in the March 2025 Direct, rounding off pretty much 8 years of being the face of Nintendo's showings, I'm not completely sure it's certain he will return. He certainly didn't host the April 2025 Direct. That was given to the three amigos of Koichi Kawamoto, the producer responsible for EPD4 and now the Switch 2, the hardware director of Switch 2, and the technical lead on recent Zelda titles, Takehiro Dota, and the general manager of the Technology Development Division, Tetsuya Sasaki. But that doesn't mean that these people will maintain this presenting role indefinitely. Yoshiaki Koizumi was the producer for the original Nintendo Switch and presented a significant chunk of the January 2017 launch for the system, but he hasn't been quite so regular a fixture in these presentations since. It's not clear why any of these three might feature outside of their specific areas going forward. Still, there are other possibilities in terms of future presenters. Shinya Takahashi is turning 62 this year. The traditional retirement age frequently doesn't mean that much to Nintendo's top brass, with not just Miyamoto but erstwhile president Tatsumi Kimishima returning after apparently resigning the presidency, with former Nintendo of America employees Kit and Krista noting that they were surprised to see him again in meetings when Shuntaro Furukawa had already taken over. But succession is an important consideration for Nintendo, and while it would be conspicuous for Takahashi to suddenly stop doing presentations mid-generation, making a change now could feel like just part of the handover. The obvious option would be to go for a far less personalized approach and simply avoid having a host entirely. Honestly, I thought this could well be on the cards for Switch 2, and I'm really pleased that we got not one but three people leading the showcase of the new console. But of course, these were also the three individuals most responsible for the press around Switch 2, and so getting them stage ready for such an important presentation was something important, but not something that was easy. I have a video which I'll link at the end, where even Mr. Sasaki's dialect was carefully sweated to ensure that things went smoothly. Ultimately, with a direct presentation, someone needs to be on hand to do press and firefight anything that goes wrong, and it's probably far easier, therefore, to have one identifiable face than to panic and send Doug Bowser to do the variable firefighting. That said, not all directs require similar levels of involvement, and with the partner directs and indie worlds having led the way in being voiceover only, a hostless future still seems like a small but significant possibility. If they do need another host then, the obvious figure would be the person who is now the general manager of Nintendo's entertainment planning department, Yoshiaki Koizumi. At 57, he is a little younger than Takahashi, but still conceivably of an age where he might retire before the Switch 2 is replaced on the market. This makes Koizumi feel a little unlikely as a successor for the direct presenter, and it seems like they might want to show a generational leap. The fact is, though, Nintendo doesn't always value this stuff in the same way that we do. Yes, the directs are hugely important showcases, but Kit and Krista often talked about how their Nintendo Minute segments would become something that was outside and sometimes a complication to their day job, and it would be understandable if harassed people at the top of Nintendo could do without having to go in front of millions of people every few months. Takahashi was obviously comfortable with doing it, and certain other senior Nintendo figures are familiar to the camera by now, but it's not a given that every person who hits a certain level of seniority is a natural fit for this role and would embrace it wholeheartedly. However, this assumes that we will continue to have directs as they have traditionally been constituted, big general showcases which cover lots of games. But since 2020, these have become far less frequent. We've seen the growth of partner showcases and the rise and rise of indie worlds. Mario had a special presentation for the 35th, and a similar one for the 40th seems locked in at the time of writing. The April 2025 Direct was very conspicuously a launch presentation for Switch 2. One option, therefore, would be to have producers linked to major games from the presentation feature in the same way that Miyamoto covers theme park, museum, and movie content, while Kawamoto and company were the faces of the Switch 2 showcase. The difficulty with this is that it risks dampening down the effect of one more thing surprises if certain faces that are too famous show up. If Aonuma introduces a presentation and nothing Zelda appears, it would certainly raise eyebrows. One way around this as well is simply to have fewer directs. I think we have seen this pattern recently from Nintendo. 2024 had just the one general direct in June, and 2025 did have the 1-2 punch of directs in March and April, but March has really felt like it was putting to bed Switch announcements for the foreseeable future, with games as far off as 2026 announced in a very unusual move for the company. I've talked before about how I think it's plausible that they could wait some time for another general direct if they lean into using Nintendo Today, social media drops, and other venues to reveal titles. And of course, since I made some of those points, we have had the announcement of the Kirby Air Riders specific direct. So, if not Takahashi or Koizumi, who is going to be our guide to the wild woods of Nintendo? I think there are two likely figures and a small handful of other people who I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot more from. First of all, Koichi Kawamoto, who has been the producer for a fairly regular cadence of Switch projects, may make sense to continue in the role. While Sasuke-san talked about struggling the most of the trio in the Switch 2 presentation because of his strong Kyoto dialect, Kawamoto appears to have been more relaxed, and as the producer for EPD4, he has been very used to speaking to the media about all kinds of weird and wonderful Nintendo initiatives over the years, so being able to introduce the whole of Nintendo's lineup would make sense. And of course, he has already been identified as the face of Switch 2 through the April presentation, so his reemergence would not come as a complete surprise. He also has a long history with presenting information to the public. Back in 2017's Corporate Social Responsibility Report by Nintendo, there was an interview where both Koizumi and Kawamoto were interviewed jointly, and back then, as the general director for the original Nintendo Switch, he had a lot to say. It seems to me that he is on the same kind of general career track as Yoshiaki Koizumi was, and so it would make a lot of sense for him to become a more regular fixture of Nintendo presentations going forward. But it may not be the case that we have just the one regular presenter. Nintendo has moved a long way from the days of having big personalities, Iwata and Reggie and Miyamoto, and it perhaps fits their new, more collegiate approach to things to have a range of people involved so that no one person comes to exemplify the company too much, and so that they have a broadly distributed talent and experience pool. I can't see Sasaki wanting to return to presenting for the reasons we've discussed, and given that the technology of the Switch 2 itself, rather than the software, was his focus, it makes sense that he might take a step back anyway, as he's not really directly involved in what is being presented for most of the time going forward. Takahiro Dota, on the other hand, has been on my radar for quite a while, even before this. He is no stranger to public speaking, having taken to the stage at the Game Developer Conference to talk Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, being interviewed in a Breath of the Wild development documentary for Nintendo, and by the press in 2019 discussing the Labo VR take on Breath of the Wild. As someone who is clearly comfortable bridging game development, technical development, and facing the press, I see Dota as someone with a big future at Nintendo. It's not clear exactly how old he is, but since he joined the company in 2003, and most of Nintendo's people enter on a graduate scheme basis, it is likely that he is in his early to mid 40s. I could see Dota or Karamoto, and perhaps even both, as the heirs apparent to Takahashi and Koizumi, so either or both would make strong leads for the forthcoming era of Nintendo presentations. But with an eye on other people who have big futures in the company, but also some comfort in dealing with the media, I think there are other possibilities who suggest themselves for people who might lead direct presentations going forward. I think we should be looking generally at people on the producer level, a topic I will be diving into in a significant way in a future video. I think the third most likely candidate, therefore, is Splatoon's very own Hisashi Nagami. Nagami is familiar with doing press for Splatoon, and there's a whole generation of Japanese young adults who grew up with his franchise, so his face may reach particularly well for the segment of the Japanese population they are particularly keen to capture. However, he's not narrowly interested in Splatoon, as he was also the producer for Dragon Drive and may well be following his own boss, Katsuya Iguchi, into having a more general interest in Nintendo development beyond just the one game series. Splatoon is the biggest hit for Nintendo since Animal Crossing back at the turn of the century, and even though it's doubtless a team effort, nevertheless, it seems that the person who has shepherded that franchise all these years is likely to be given considerable latitude by Nintendo and would have a big future at the company. I guess that if he did turn up, he would need a bit more of an introduction, as while he has hosted Splatoon content in the past, it would be his first time as the overall host of a direct, and it might seem like an awkward left turn for him to suddenly step into the presenting role. However, with Splatoon Raiders already announced, Nagami's appearance as the host of the Nintendo presentation would create an aura of anticipation without being a massive spoiler. The presentation could start with an overview and date drop for Splatoon Raiders, move into Nagami talking about it, and then he could continue discussing the rest of the games on the slate. I think Kawamoto, Dota, and Nagami are the big three likely, but I think a few other names probably deserve a mention. Firstly, ARMS and Mario Kart producer Kosuke Ibuki, who did a fair bit of press in his day, especially around ARMS, and who was also in his 40s, can't be counted out. A female presenter might be desirable in Nintendo's strategy to appeal to female gamers more, and there is an obvious candidate of the required level of seniority that they might approach. Animal Crossing's Aya Kyogoku, who has been a producer for the series since 2013, a director for multiple Animal Crossing titles, has done plenty of press over the years, and perhaps stands in a similar position to Nagami as someone who currently is the face of one franchise, but who clearly has the seniority and experience to step into a broader and more senior role at the company if she wished to. I think it's unlikely that Kyogoku will appear in a direct before a new Animal Crossing game though, as her appearance without any whiff of Animal Crossing news might be seen as woodhawkering poor Animal Crossing fans' hearts. Then again, they could just turn for particular directs to the most senior producers from whichever their big new thing is at the time. Kento Motakura of APD8 is unlikely to be behind only Donkey Kong Bonanza, and once the new Mario game comes into the spotlight, I could see him as being a great person to have on the show. Kensuke Tanabe and Risa Tabata have been a tag team for a long time, but Tabata recently was promoted as producer for Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, her first producer credit after a very long time supporting Tanabe, and so perhaps with Metroid Prime 4 coming out, they could share the spotlight if the intention is that she would take a more senior responsibility for managing Metroid Prime going forward. And look, this might all come to nothing. There's no rule that says Shinya Takahashi has to exit stage left, but after 8 solid years of doing sterling work holding down the direct fort, it seems not just plausible, but in some respects strategically wise for Nintendo to turn to a new generation to start presenting its games to the public. Still, my expectation is that we will see fewer general directs and probably with new people like Kawamoto and Dota at the helm. In terms of forecasts, I'll lay out my judgments and assess them all when the time comes, but you can obviously make your own assessments. I think it's 90% likely we will get a new General Direct before March, 70% likely that there will be some kind of presenter, and only 50% that we will see Takahashi helming the next General Direct. I think seeing either Kawamoto or Dota or both in a Direct by the end of 2026 is a 70% chance, and I give a 70% chance that we will see Nagami in some role in a Direct before the end of June 2026, if only because it will be odd to have more than 12 months without a Splatoon Raiders update, and he's usually the face of this kind of thing. I think there's a 30% chance that we will see someone presenting a Direct for the first time by the end of 2026. For more on Nintendo's producers, which is currently the topic of a fairly substantial research project I'm working on, stick around for future videos. I really do appreciate you being here, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.